Not really. I mean, some people can see it that way.
Service learning activities on campus could not occur without strong leadership from the top. And here representing the Provost's office is the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education. Arlene Walker-Andrews is a professor of psychology here at the University of Montana and a big advocate for high-quality experiential education. And I could say more, but I would rather let you hear from Arlene herself. So please join me in welcoming Arlene Walker-Andrews.
Well, I'm pleased that I'm actually here just to introduce your keynote speaker. For over 25 years, Ms. Cruz has been a practitioner, a leader, and an advocate, and an author on the need for pedagogies of engagement in higher education. She attended the University of the Philippines and obtained her BA in political science at the University of San Francisco and completed her MA also in political science from Marquette University, and I know now she's in the midst of and almost done with a PhD as well. She's now an independent consultant, but she has done a number of things over the past decade. She directed the Haas Center for Public Service at Stanford University, having worked in the center as well. She developed the Public Service Scholars Program that integrates service with senior honors theses, research, taught service learning courses in the program for urban studies, and actually lived with students as a residence fellow. Before that, she worked in Minnesota as the executive director of the High Education Consortium for Urban Affairs. And in this position, she led as many as 18 different universities in developing community-based programs in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Latin America, Scandinavia, and other parts of the world. She's received numerous awards, including an honorary degree from Carleton College and the Distinguished Citizen Scholar Award from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I think she brings a fresh and refreshing perspective to service learning and to what she would call doing good in the community. That is, she wants to provoke critical thinking about doing good. For example, and I'm going to quote here from one of her talks, "In places where there is chronic poverty and everything that goes with it, should we be focused on wealth creation, as through the very now popular social entrepreneurship programs, or on redistributive programs? I am urging you to stir up thoughtfulness because we need critical and rigorous analytical thinking to shape our choices for doing good." I am certain that she will provoke all of us to thinking about this topic and other topics and transforming service learning, places, and lives. I give you Ms. Cruz.
Thank you very much for the welcome and the introduction. And I'm going to step out here for a minute. I think you can hear me, right? Mm-hmm. So in the language of my country of origin, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I just said more or less the equivalent of good afternoon, but the literal translation is a beautiful afternoon to you. So, just to ground me in where I come from. This is kind of a mouthful of a title. So I want to also locate that title and my sense of urgency about this work by telling you a story first, and then reading to you a short quote. And then I would like to share with you using slides so that I can make it move a little faster than if I were simply retelling to you or trying to tell to you a distillation of 25 years of experience and practice. So I would like to be able to share with you what I've learned through many years of making mistakes so that you can make fresh ones, not the same ones. So to start off with a story. As an immigrant to this country, I was very self-conscious about wanting my kids to benefit from whatever, in quotes, American experience could be for them. And so, of course, with my two children, both very athletic, when my son was very young, I would take him to Little League practice, baseball. But I confess that I had not much experience with athletics and how great sports is in America until my kids are grown. In fact, my son now is on the San Jose Earthquake soccer team. So, and my daughter, who's a labor and delivery nurse, who does a lot of marathons. In any case, I take him to Little League practice, and it seemed like he was always hanging on to this baseball that he brought. And he would throw the ball, but then he would grab it and be very possessive about it. And an idea came to my head, and one day we were going to Little League practice again, and he said, "Mom, where's my ball?" And of course I want to say, well, you should take care of your own stuff, but I didn't. I said, "Oh, it's by your feet." So he picks up the ball, and out comes this wail, like a cry of a wounded animal, like terribly wounded animal. And I said, "David, what's wrong?" And he said, Mom, you ruined it." And I said, "David, you were acting so possessive, so I wrote your name on it, so that nobody else would take it." And he said, "But Mom, Nolan Ryan wrote his name on it." And I said, "Who's Nolan Ryan?" So just in case there's some of you here who are like me who don't know, I guess there is the practice of signed balls by celebrity athletes, and Nolan Ryan is a celebrated pitcher. And so I had truly ruined his ball, and he's 22 now and hasn't yet forgiven me. But I understand now that I made assumptions about what would be good to do. And since we have this unequal power relationship, I'm the mother, he's the little boy's son, and I assumed I had the expertise to know what's the good to do. I wrote his name on it, and of course you know that this is not so opaque a parable about campus community partnerships when one side says, we know what is the expert thing to do, and we'll go ahead and do it, and sometimes it causes harm and hurt, resentment, and so forth. So that story is just to open the door to the possibility that when we attempt to engage in a practice that we hope benefits all participants, including the community, we talk a lot about community partnerships, that the, in quotes, I'll call the presumptive good of what the action is maybe warrants an interrogation, a question about, well, indeed, is this good to do? Maybe we shouldn't assume. So that's about the parable. The second thing is, I just wanted to read to you a quote, and if you've heard it before, well, you get to hear it again. But I love this one. It's from 1744. And the little title from a book called Great Native American Speeches. Great Speeches by Native Americans, edited by Bob Blaisdell. And the little heading says, Benjamin Franklin tells the story of the speech that follows, how at a council between them and the government of Virginia, the Iroquois were offered a college education for some of their young men. And the representative of the Iroquois had this to say back. We know that you highly esteem the kind of learning taught in those colleges, and that the maintenance of our young men while with you would be very expensive to you. We are convinced, therefore, that you mean to do us good by your proposal, and we thank you heartily. But you who are wise and must know that different nations have different conceptions of things, and you will therefore not take it amiss if our ideas of this kind of education happen not to be the same as yours. We have had some experience of it. Several of our young people were formerly brought up at the colleges of the northern provinces. They were instructed in all your sciences, but when they came back to us, they were bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to bear either cold or hunger, knew neither how to build a cabin, take a deer, or kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly, were therefore neither fit for hunters, warriors, or counselors. They were totally good for nothing. We are, however, not the less obliged by your kind offer, though we decline accepting it. And to show our grateful sense of it, if the gentlemen of Virginia will send us a dozen of their sons, we will take great care of their education, instruct them in all we know, and make men of them. And that quote is simply to remind us that what is at stake with this thing that we have many names for, community-engaged pedagogies, community-based learning, service learning, civic engagement, many, many names now, is what is at stake is the alignment between our expectations of the good of education and the good or the benefits to the larger society. So if you can imagine that our community partners or the larger community could shape the curricula of our colleges and universities such that the outcomes would be more directly beneficial to them. Leave it to your imagination to figure out what those curricula might look like. So that's just a little reminder about what's at stake and that we don't all agree on what it is that is the good to be done. So I'm renewing the spirit of service learning. Why review the big picture? When I think the typical thing is when we gather together as people who practice this, whatever name you give it at your campus, the typical thing is to exchange how to do it. But I think that even with the now coming from the margins to more to the core, not quite there, but closer to the core than the margins when we started a long time ago, even so, I think there is a tendency to lose sight of what were the originating or the original animating energies that motivated people to do something that takes a lot of time, few rewards, at least not monetary and not status and titles, and yet people persist. So the toolkits and methods and best practice tends to dominate, but it's in the context of, and this is what I want to remind us, contested vision and purposes. This is not a monolithic field. We don't all agree on why. And I have a feeling that when you analyze what's behind all the different terms that we give it, it's because there are different visions and purposes. So why focus on the big picture vision now? Well, I think it's the right time. The maturity of the field is such that there are enough people who know how to do this and are doing this. So it's the right time to reframe and in so doing, ask the question, what indeed is the purpose? What's the big vision? That the perspectives on vision and purpose are diverse, sometimes competing and conflicting. And I think with the maturity of the field of practice, that's okay to know that and not be put off by the fact that we don't all agree. And that the vision and purpose, whether explicitly articulated or invisible as in a presumptive truth, that is, we just all assume that we agree, shapes practice and determines criteria for success and effectiveness. So you know the whole thing about measuring and measurable outcomes. If we don't even have a very good way to define what the purpose and the vision that is shaping the practice, it's very difficult to come to an agreement, even when you measure it, that indeed we're successful. Because you say, well, I don't care about what you measured, because it doesn't matter to me. So, we've heard this, quote, service combined with learning adds value to each and transforms both. Nice quote. I think it is more of what I call an aspirational statement. That is, it's not so much that when we practice this, we are able to align service and learning perfectly, but that it is what we aspire to do in engaging in this. So I want to just go ahead and share with you how I define service learning, just as a starting point or a frame or a foundation for what it is I want to share. Even as I share it with you, know that even if you just Google the National Service Learning Clearinghouse, which is a vast, vast storage of everything that has to do with service learning, you will find there 100 and some definitions of service learning. So go help yourself. I am suggesting that service learning is really, the foundation of it is experiential learning. And experiential learning, I define, is an intentionally designed process of learning through reflection and experience. You might find it a little curious that I say intentionally designed. And the reason why that's there is because, okay, let me throw it out. Do you breathe? Yeah? I hope so. Do you need to learn how to breathe? Well, we do reflexively, right? Because if you stop breathing, we probably will keel over and possibly die. But there are many ancient practices of disciplined breathing, as in yoga, meditation, etc. It's the same with experiential learning. We learn from experience all the time. We do it reflexively. Automatically, I mean. But to actually deliberately, with intent in the design of the instruction, to learn from the experiences, I'm just highlighting that this is different from simply saying, well, we always learn from experience. So in community-based experiential learning, we're not talking about any and all experiences. We're talking about the experience is of the experience of doing community service, which I'm defining as the application of one's gifts, skills, and resources to provide value to communities in the context of a reciprocal relationship called partnership. So I define service learning as a course, a program, or activity. So this is different from people who say it's only a course. Designed as a process of learning through reflection on the experience of doing service. So if you take a look at the handout that's on your, at the table, it's a very simple matrix. And as you can see, I am not skilled at aligning all my lines, so they're all awry. And I meant it to be just quadrants, 4 boxes, and it got all glopped up. Sorry about that. But I drew it here, and it's only 2 dimensions, service and learning on one side, and service on one side, and learning here, low to high. And I'm going to return to this at the very end, and this is the only how-to that I'm going to offer to you, but I think it can be very rich. I'm just suggesting in this 2 dimensions of the pedagogy of service and learning, it is a creative, hopefully a creative tension between 2 values. That is, that learning will happen, rich learning, out of the experience of doing the service, but the service really is to benefit communities. So those are the 2 values that we try to align or integrate in the pedagogy. And as Bob Sigmund tried to suggest, that one quadrant, this lower left quadrant, is about those that are designed, not talking about outcomes, those that are designed with fairly minimal service and fairly minimal learning. So the 3 hours that you do to pull out invasive species weeds may not have great depth or intensity in terms of the design of either the learning or the service, but we wouldn't say that it's totally useless. It's just designed that way. There are lots of programs, or I should say fewer programs, that are heavy on the service, so big S, small l in the lower right quadrant. So there a few institutions where the depth of partnerships with school systems like University of Pennsylvania, USC, a number of campuses is such that they have close to a memorandum of understanding or a legal commitment, more closely aligned to a legal commitment, where the focus is not on the learning for college students, the focus is on a partnership that will primarily benefit people in the community, so big S. This is probably the top left quadrant is the most popular in higher education. Of course, it stands to reason because the business in higher ed is learning, so big L with a very small s. The tendency is because there are only so many weeks in a quarter or a semester and you got to deliver some curricular course goals that are primarily content. The big L is there, and the tendency is to say, well, the service has to support the learning, but we know what's the most important thing, and that's the learning, and often these are fragmented. They're not continuous and not sustainable in terms of benefits to community. So that's that quadrant as opposed to here, and this is the holy grail, which is the big S, big L, and that we try to align the two things, and that we're always trying to aim towards that. Now, I just want to suggest right from the start that I'm not suggesting that any of these quadrants are better or worse. Now, that might surprise you. I'm suggesting that in any given campus, you might want to locate where all your activities, courses, programs are, and map them in these quadrants and ask yourself the question, how many of these should be here? Because you need a starting place, an entry point for everybody. How many of these should be here given your curricula and what your strategic priorities are at your university or campus? How many of these can we actually do that are truly sustainable and is not an empty promise that by year 2, oh, it's too hard, we won't do it anymore? And how many of these can begin to move towards here because it needs to be, or that your campus, in terms of your portfolio of offerings, needs some model or what I call signature programs, so that there are a few models that embody the highest form of the integration of service and learning. So when you look at your offerings, you might ask yourself, where does my course, my activity, my program fit? Because it needs to be there, and not because, oh, it's wrong because it's here. We need to have many of these, because without this foundation, all these other quadrants are relatively empty. So that's one little how-to tip that I just wanted to share with you in looking at what you're doing and what your campus is doing. So now I'm going to try to distill a philosophical orientation, a vision of what this is about. And because I start out by saying we have competing views about this, I'm going to own that it is my view. And it is a minority view. It is not a majority. I look everywhere, and the reason why I went back to school is because I need the structure for writing what I need to write, because I hate writing. And I need to write because a lot of the ideas that I'm trying to share and develop are complex enough that it needs the cumulativeness of the back and forth of debate that's in written form that we call academic scholarship. And I realize that the maturity of the thinking is going to require that kind of writing. And if I want to debate and argue with people about what I think is not such a constructive direction for this work, I'm going to have to engage in what is the primary medium still of the academy, which is writing. So I'm sharing with you that connecting campus and community is hard work, translating across diverse groups. So just to return, the other tip I want to give you is, in order to strengthen any of the work in these 3 quadrants to move in this direction, it's pretty simple in my view. It is the strength and quality of partnerships. To the extent that the partnership is of strong quality, whether the work is in this area, or this area, the ability to negotiate to deal with problem solving, to make changes in goals, whether learning goals or service goals. If there's a quality of relationship, that's possible. But when it's tenuous and thin, then it's like people get offended. And it's hard to bargain and negotiate and be flexible. So the strength of partnerships, I think, is what will lead us towards that direction. But it is hard work to do. So I know this is not the culture of the academy to express a whole lot of feelings, but I'm going to do that anyway. So I just wanted to read to you part of a poem to express how it feels to me when I do this work of trying to bridge learning and service, campus and community, which, as you know, the academy has a distinct culture. And some of the language, the ways of doing stuff, trying to be objective, clinically detached in some instances, highly analytic, in the language of some people, highly cognicentric. That is, it is more analytic, intellectual, as opposed to feeling affective. So this is how it feels like, and it's just part of the poem. It's the bridge poem by Donna Kate Rushin. I've had enough. I'm sick of seeing and touching both sides of things, sick of being the damn bridge for everybody. Nobody can talk to anybody without me, right? I explain my mother to my father to my little sister to my brother to the white feminists to the black church folks to the ex-hippies to the black separatists to the artists to my friends' parents. Then I got to explain myself to everybody. I do more translating than a goddamn UN.
That's a good one.
So when you're the bridge, trying to make things happen, you know, one of my friends who works in the community said, well, Nadine, you know, you got to teach those people in the academy a little bit more porch sitting 101. I said, why, Julia? Well, because, you know, where I am, where I sit, if you don't know how to hang out and relate, I don't really want to do any business with you, because how do I trust you? I said, but you know, time. They're going to wonder about all this hanging out in the community. I don't get paid to get hanging out in the community. Well, she said, do you want to do this or not? So, it's hard work. So I'm sharing with you I'm Being a Reflected Practitioner, which is a whole body of work by Donald Chern. In his book, The Reflective Practitioner, How Professionals Think in Action, or The Educating the Reflective Practitioner, he, along with Chris Argyris, who are theorists of organizational behavior, experiential learning, and so forth. So it's a large body of work, and I'm just borrowing from him the notion of reflective practitioner. So for over 25 years, I primarily did stuff. I didn't stop to theorize about it. I didn't stop to think, oh, what theory of experience, John Dewey's or Paulo Freire or Jane Addams or who. I just did stuff because I wanted very much for education to benefit communities. So what I'm sharing with you is my mental map. This is from the language of Donald Chern. And his language of two theories of action. One is theories in use. That's for most practitioners like myself. It's what's implied when you're doing stuff that shapes or guides your actions, but you don't stop there and say, oh, this is one of the 5 theories of experiential education. You just do stuff. But then there's the espoused theory, which is a much more reflexive or self-aware advocacy, if you will, or mapping out of a whole body of theory that you're saying, I'm using David Kolb's theory of experiential learning in this way that I am doing. Most practitioners cannot tell you where were the body of work they're referencing or shaping their work. So what I'm sharing with you is now my espoused theory. I'm unpacking the mental map that I had when I was doing this stuff. So this is where I was born. This is the northernmost area of the Philippines, which, if you don't know, is the Republic of the Philippines, just across from China and Japan, north of Australia, 7,600 islands stretching 3,000 miles north to south. And I was born in the most northern area of the Philippines, and it looks like this. This is the rice steppes. They're carved out of the mountainside, and people grow crops on this mountainside. This has been so for hundreds of years, and it was built not with machinery, but with hand and small tool implements. It was almost destroyed by the effort to build a powerhouse dam that would have flooded completely these rice steppes, and it would have been destroyed. So the ancestral lands of the Ifugao, one of several indigenous peoples of the Philippines, I consider them expert sustainable farmers, as when people who opposed the building of the dam discovered, soil scientists now say that they had been practicing for over hundreds of years some of the most perfect forms of sustainable agriculture, which we today, of course, we're all about environmental sustainability, the correct way to raise things and so forth. And here these people who were supposedly, in quotes, backwards because they needed to go to school and catch up with civilization, that they were expendable. But in fact, today we know that they have been stewards not only of a practice that we now value more, but stewards of ways of knowing that we urgently need. I'm going to jump to another part of the country here in the United States with this individual far away from the Philippines. I found this story about Thomas Cannon in an obituary in a newspaper. Turns out Thomas Cannon lived extremely impoverished life by choice. He lived on a pension, and when he died, it was discovered he had given over $125,000 of his own money in $1,000, $2,000, and $3,000 or $4,000 checks to people he had read about in the newspapers who he felt could use his help. And even though he would never have called himself this, I would call him a philanthropist. And he was opposed to having a foundation carrying his name. He said what he wanted in his honor and memory was simple: help somebody. So what is belied by that simple statement is, over the years, he learned how to give effectively, which every philanthropic organization attempts to, in quotes, leverage their dollars. And he had done so all by himself, following certain principles of giving. And so I want to simply honor him as a philanthropist, as I honor the Ifugao as expert sustainable farmers. And now these are images from YUCA, Youth United for Community Action, who've done a lot of work on environmental justice issues. These are high school students in East Palo Alto in the Bay Area, where I come from. And these high school students have done due diligence, doing terribly unglamorous work of studying OSHA regulations, understanding brownfields, knowing what the city council was able or not able to do in terms of preventing toxic waste in their environment. And over a period of years of study, traditional community organizing, door knocking, talking to people, doing the research, presenting at city council, they successfully shut down a toxic waste plant in East Palo Alto. These are high school students, and want to honor Youth United for Community Action, who are community organizers in East Palo Alto. And finally, I just want to honor the people of Le Chambon in southern France. They have been the subject of a documentary called Weapons of the Spirit and many books. I just mentioned one, Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. And if you haven't heard of them, I tell the story over and over again because I do not tire of honoring them by mentioning this little village of Le Chambon, village of about 5,000 primarily subsistence farmers who over a period of the World War II years housed approximately the same number of people, 5,000 people, Jews fleeing the Holocaust. What struck me about the documentary when I saw it was the filmmaker, who had been an infant housed in Le Chambon, had emigrated to the United States, returned as a documentarist. The camera pans to this now elderly couple, and he asks the question. It's in French and subtitled in English. He asks the question, well, why did you do what you did? In fact, curious about why did you risk your life? Why did you step outside the comfort zone? And the couple look at each other, and I thought it was just wonderful what they, in quotes, said. They look at each other, and their answer was this. I thought that spoke more eloquently than any statement about, well, I read this moral philosophy and theory of ethics and went and took a seminar in graduate school about moral philosophy. No, it was as if they were saying, what is with the question? What else would have been the right thing to do? As if it were an organic, natural, reflexive action in response to what was needed. So in Weapons of the Spirit, Pierre Sauvage was the filmmaker, and I think he did a wonderful job of honoring the people of Le Chambon who, in quotes, did good. So these people are not scholars, people in the community. What do they know? Well, indulge me for a moment by suggesting, imagine for a moment that this circle represents the entire universe of knowledge that we would need to have in order to be capable of addressing the most difficult, intractable social issues of our human condition. In fact, new slavery exists. The Philippines is the number 2, I hate to say, sex industry provider. And they are primarily women and children who have no choice. I consider that slavery. Children who are indentured into service work, that's slavery. Among many things I know in this audience, I need not belabor how many things we need to address. So imagine for a moment, this circle represents the entire circle of knowledge, capacities, qualities of self that we would need in order to be capable to effectively address all those things that are life and death for a lot of people in the world. I think that much is academic-based knowledge. Now that is a heresy to say in most places I have been. In fact, in some places where I have worked, they would say, well, where's my $45,000 of tuition money going to then, if it's only that little part of the whole circle? But there's empathy and vision and utopian imagination and forgiveness and organizing and developing a sense of agency and healing and having a moral compass and standing up against injustice, community building, follow through, persistence, courage. In some instances, maybe many instances, the thing that we need is not more data and more knowledge, it's persistence and courage. And where do we learn this? Usually not in a formal classroom. It's through interaction organically, as in Le Chambon, as in East Palo Alto, as in many places, being part of a community. The problem being the academy tends to own for itself the authoritative voice of what counts as knowledge. And I think that that's a problem. When the academy dominates, community knowledge is in the rest of the circle, And we learn from and legitimize only a little slice of the entire circle. And so I think this problem means that community-based knowledge, which for purposes of this presentation is the forms of knowledge that we need to be effective in the world, but is not codified in what we call Western academic scholarship. It's marginalized, silenced, as if, well, you need to know that slice of the pie. If you know anything else outside of it, as most of our very experienced community partners do not have academically codified scholarship, but who have knowledge that is urgently needed. Without it, you cannot have the judgment, nor the expertise, nor the skills. So what happens when the circle of knowledge is broken? We have disrespect and exclusion of different ways of knowing. We lose diverse ways of knowing, which in the big language of the academy is epistemological diversity, episteme, or epistemology, the study of knowledge. And that kind of diversity includes diverse community-based ways of knowing. Why does it matter? What is at stake? Our very survival. I'm going to gloss over this. This could be a whole subject just by itself. We're now discovering that a lot of medicinal herbs are super important for healing, and there are many healing practices that are outside what we consider technical medical treatment. So healing is a much larger universe than science-based medicine. And of course, today, even Stanford University will teach alternative medicine. So there's gaining recognition for other ways that are not science-based, but nonetheless important. But as we know, pharmaceutical companies are now patenting what has been communal-based knowledge about healing and medicinal properties. This is just one example. Justice. Why exclude the knowledge base of people? We make a big deal about, oh, we're so inclusive. We want to be diverse. We want all kinds of people in our university, but we don't need to know what they know. They're here to know what we know, not what they know. Wholeness. Because the entire universe of knowledge actually is what all of us need to be whole. How often do we feel kind of like divided and compartmentalized? This happens to be the experience of a lot of so-called minority students, that they have to learn a whole way of being in the academy in order simply just to survive. And people don't get it when we say, oh, it's killing the soul. I feel like I'm becoming another person. That's a whole nother topic. But how does service learning address this challenge? I mean, what's the good of service learning for what it is I'm presenting to you? I think that service learning connects community knowledge with academic scholarship. It is a wonderful opportunity to be a bridge builder across the entire circle of knowledge. It is not primarily about serve those people, as it is how do we bring all of that we know that we urgently need to know together in a whole piece in this circle. I'll use a musical term. We all need to be polyphonic. Polyphony refers to having several melodic lines at the same time and still have beauty. And we need to be able to have the ability to be polyphonic. When you need science to build a bridge, you know science. When you need to have healing processes, you know healing and you know its relationship to science-based medicine. When you need empathy and courage, you know that that's what you need as opposed to one more self-study or strategic plan. Some nonprofits die under the burden of one more strategic plan when What's needed is a board of directors that has the guts to say, this is what we need to do. And guts is different from one more set of data. So I'm arguing for reframing and reclaiming the context of service learning. And I think it's much more complicated than we've made it up to be. So I think we have primarily focused on the pedagogy. How do we teach and how do we learn? But I think there are three parts to the whole circle. It implicates what do we need to know. So one way to say it in big academic terms is pedagogy implicates epistemology. But the driver to all that, who cares about pedagogical fineness? Or who cares about, what do we know, one more term in epistemology? When the animating energy, the stuff that moved people in the early days, pioneering days of community engaged teaching, was how do we want the world to be? What is the world that we wanted to create? That was the question. And how were we going to locate that question and the effort to answer it in places like the academy? It didn't start out with what kind of pedagogy we're going to create now. It started out with what is the world that we need that is so full of injustice and full of suffering for a lot of people who do not have a voice in creating epistemology or pedagogy. So the question of how do we want to teach implies what do we want to know, and it's driven, I believe, by how do we want to be, which is an ontological question. So the three dimensions, the context for service learning, how to teach, what to know, what to create, has big terms: pedagogy, epistemology, ontology. And what is the ideal that we want to create? And I see here that I'm running out of time, so I'll speed it up. The ideal that we want to create, I'm going to suggest, is not something that comes to you when you just sit down reading a book and say, oh, well, I like that approach to whatever. So I want to use myself as an example. I think the way we answer a question, like what is the world that we want to create, flows from our own story. So let me just give you a tiny little glimpse of that story. That's my story. My personal journey in answering the question, what is the world, the ideal world we want to create? How do we want to be in the world? Started out by experiencing the real world. I quit school my freshman year at the University of the Philippines, which your associate provost didn't mention, because I was so disgusted with school. There was so much I did not know when I realized it had never been taught. I decided, I'm not going to bother with this. I'll teach myself. So I went up and down the Philippines on my own, which was totally taboo at that time. No young lady should be running around by herself, figuring things out. I slept in peasant villages and camps for labor migrant workers. I wanted to know for myself why it was that Filipinos were 60% then as now under the poverty line. Today, whole communities on Smoky Mountain, which is a heaping garbage dump, where people live because there is no other place to live in Greater Manila. So I wanted to know for myself. So I was able to answer that question primarily in the beginning by knowing what I didn't want, because I discovered it. And I call that the focus on dystopia. You know the word utopia. It's the opposite of utopia. It's the worst possible alternative to the ideal. And you have heard of the isms. Dystopic elements of society have names: racism, imperialism, colonialism, Sexism, lots of isms. I call it the scholarship of bad news. And primarily, the response is fighting and resistance struggle. We know this from social movement struggle. And the terms that come up are not service, help, or civic engagement. When you're fighting against slavery, you don't say, I'm civically engaged. You're in allyship or in solidarity with or in coalition work with people where you understand your political location and you align with another group of people whose interests are not your interests, but your values and vision for the ideal world aligns with their struggle. So you're not helping them, and you're not involved because you're civically engaged. You're involved because you're in allyship with them, and you understand what that means. It means you're not directing their business. Lots of scholarship, whether it's Linda Tuihai-Smith, who is a Maori scholar in New Zealand, in her brilliant book, Decolonizing Research Methodology. The first few chapters, I think, is just a superb summary of all of Western scholarship, and then she juxtaposes that with Maori ways of doing research. Victoria Taulikorpis, you gotta read this book, Paradigm Wars, Indigenous Peoples' Resistance to Globalization, because every chapter is written by an Indigenous scholar who speaks out on how these terribly abstract paradigms of economics, abstract theories, actually mean blood for some people. So paradigm wars are not about, oh, it's just a debate about ideas. It's about how we relate to the earth given a certain view of economics, as abstract as that might be, actually means life and death struggle for certain people because they don't aspire to be part of the global marketplace. But do they have a choice? Or Staying Alive, Women, Ecology and Development by Vandana Shiva, an Indian, as in South Asia, Indian, nuclear physicist who's made it her lifetime work to apply her knowledge of nuclear physics and physics in general to these issues. So after 20-some years of being enraged, furious, angry all the time, fighting all the time, you know, I don't know if it's age or whatever, I realized I was like going to die on the vine as a human being if that is all that I did. Because it's very hard to be sustained by being angry about what exists, and hard to be sustained and to grow, to be primarily hostage to the paradigms that you're fighting against. So if I spend my entire life studying imperialism, studying cultural imperialism, what happened to the Philippines 350 years under Spain, 50 years in the United States, I can recite to you what happened to the Filipinos under Manifest Destiny. I can tell you all the bad things, but it's really hard to survive internally, just being angry and fighting against something. So I shifted to something that I think is absolutely necessary without abandoning the other, which is a focus on the utopic. Well, what is the ideal that you're wanting to have come alive then? If you know what it is you don't want, do you know what it is you do want? And the energy for it requires imagination and vision, and the mode is creation, and I think that service learning and community-engaged pedagogies provides a huge opportunity to engage in small-scale experiments of the ideal. So you know you're not going to stop environmental degradation worldwide. You know that your work at your campus with energy conservation and recycling is not going to cure everything about environmental justice. But you start with small-scale experiments of the ideal, which includes that whoever participates, students, community, staff, faculty, create also a community of learners so that the process by which you create a more ideal world that is sustainable is aligned with how you do it, so that the students don't come back and say, oh, it's a really good thing what we're doing in terms of the products and outcomes, but it really sucks. The group dynamics is horrible. It's really tyrannical in class, and we don't really have a voice. Never mind that we're going to cure energy issues in the whole rest of the world, but the way we live as a community, it sucks. So to align everything. So there are these two sides, the fight to survive, create to thrive. I don't think of it as binary opposites. I don't think of it as, well, it's one or the other. I think of it as, again, polyphonic. We weave in and out. Sometimes you gotta fight. If you don't fight, you're not gonna stop the damage. But you can't only just fight. You also got to create what you say you want. And I think it's different skills. It's kind of like being an artist of the social order. It's a performance art. So when we create our reality, our world, it's the art of the social order. It's civic arts. The literal artistic performance of creating the alternative ideal world that you want. And you do it with other people. It's a public art. Civic arts requires imagination, but unfortunately, schooling and banking education, the traditional stuff, I'm not saying all of it is bad, but a lot of the assumptions behind expertise and what I call traditional schooling snuffs out imagination. I hate to think of all the kids in school who are just going for the test, but losing imagination. How do we rise to the challenge? And I need to end because we're gonna run out of time. We still matter. Even though I painted the picture of this tiny wedge in the big circle, like, oh, we don't matter, we matter. Education matters. Why? Because concepts matter. Is poverty due to misfortune or injustice? Well, it matters for the action that you take. If it's primarily injustice, well, you know what you need to do. If it's primarily misfortune, charitable acts of depth and quality is absolutely the right thing to do. I do not believe in, oh, it's justice versus charity, as if charity were nothing. How many of us starved for a charitable act? Not talking about casual, throw out, drive-by community service kind of charity. I mean deep charity. So concepts frame understanding and response. Do you help the unfortunate versus fight injustice? And you know, each of those words carries baggage. When we say unfortunate, some people think of them as the undeserving poor. Other people think of them as, it could have been me. Concepts frame understanding and response. Do you create wealth versus redistribute? These are very complex, abstract ideas. And I doubt most of us sitting by ourselves without the benefit of an entire educational structure can get to a place where we can make a judgment about that all by ourselves without just simply saying, well, it's my opinion. So in order to act, we need lenses to see. After all, there is no immaculate perception. We don't see rawly. What we see is already embedded in our language. The interpretation, was the person executed, assassinated, murdered? Different meanings. Same physical. The person is fired on by a firing squad and lies dead. And whole nation rises up because they say the person was assassinated or executed or murdered, depending. So consciousness, concepts, theories are foundation for judgment and action. These are all complex and challenging. There's a book by Lorraine Code, a UK English philosopher, a book called Epistemic Responsibility. I really just sat up and noticed when I saw what she wrote. She said, sometimes we need to account for the fact that the knowledge base is either flawed or inadequate. And it may be our personal responsibility, or it may be the service that we do is to construct or develop a more adequate knowledge base or epistemology. Socially responsible ways of knowing. So, to go a little faster, losing time, but not all lenses excite imagination or motivation. After all, who really wants to deal with things like, well, if production sites are mobile, why shouldn't labor be mobile? You know, questions like that. Or if economic development and the contribution to the Philippines' GDP is through repatriated earnings, which is the earnings of Filipinos worldwide who cannot find jobs in the Philippines because it's inadequate for all jobs. They're all over the world 10, 11 months of the year. Their kids are being raised by other people, but they send their earnings home. Mexico is like that. Philippines is like that. To raise the question about, is this global economic justice? You know, it requires a level of conceptual mastery of economic theories. Not all of it is exciting. That's why we need active learning, experiential learning at the core of education. Community-based and service learning are a type of experiential learning where we develop lenses to see through learning that integrates thinking with action. And one of the most important goals is to care about the questions, the acting and engaging, to care through the authority of personal experience, not what the teacher said, not what you read in the books, not what somebody else more expert than you, but your personal experience, to care deeply enough to be motivated, committed to seek the answers lifelong through both thinking and action, not just sitting in a chair, but neither simply acting and acting with no direction. How can we provide this kind of thinking? Through a more rich or robust service learning pedagogy, and it requires decentering the academy so that we can become part of the whole, a partner with respect for knowledge diversity, so that the community and the academy are part of a circle, but the academy is not the dominant part of the circle, but a part of the circle. And we change to create campus community partnership-based teaching and learning. So it's not serve those people, but partnerships among people with different ways of knowing that are integral to lifelong learning and engaging in a diverse world. It's complicated. I'm skipping over because the perspectives of what is good to be done through service are contested. We don't all agree. And this translation work is difficult, so I read to you the bridge poem. That's how I feel about it. It's a community drama of difference of democratic civic arts. And how will we do this work? How am I already doing this work? I want to suggest something as I close. John Gardner, he's deceased now, used to be the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Lyndon B. Johnson, who is one of the developers of the war on poverty. Not very many people know that even though Lyndon B. Johnson was a Democrat, he was the sole Republican in a Democratic administration. When I talked to him about my loss of confidence in doing something significant, he said, don't forget, Nadine, fighting is about like having your body immune system. Think about it as when you do things every day to build your health through everyday choices. Your body is more capable of fighting off through a healthy immune system. It's like societies and communities. You don't just engage only in fighting against, but you engage every day in weaving together the fabric of community. And I like to think that this work is about weaving the fabric of community by engaging in small-scale experiments of the ideal. So I'm going to end with this, with a Buddhist story in Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh, who you know is a Buddhist monk, an activist peacemaker who was nominated by no less than Martin Luther King for a Nobel Peace Prize in peacemaking. So I'm going to end by just telling you this story. So in this book called Being Peace, which I love the title, it's not doing peace, it's being peace. He says, the Buddha tells this story about a wealthy merchant who comes home to find his house is burned down. And he finds the ashes of who he thinks is the ashes of his only son, and puts it in a pouch, and he carries the pouch around with him. And he beats his chest, moaning, groaning, grieving his loss. And one day, Papa, let me in. And he said, go away, because he thinks it's just somebody fooling with him. Papa, let me in. He said, go away. He repeats over and over until finally no more knocks at the door, and father and son never see each other again. And the Buddha ends the story by saying, sometimes the truth comes knocking at your door, and you do not open it. This way of teaching, of connecting with community, is to say we open the doors of the academy to the many founts of wisdom and truths that exist, that we all urgently need as a whole piece and not a fragmented, sliced up pie of a universe of knowledge that as a whole we all urgently need. Thank you very much.
I want to also thank Nadine for that wonderful keynote, very passionate and obviously very driven work that she's been doing for many years, and will hopefully influence our work as well for many years. So on behalf of the University of Montana, I want to just present a small gift of our appreciation. And to let everybody know, Nadine is going to be doing a discussion session immediately following the luncheon, so we can do Q&A at that point in time. So thank you, and we'll continue to move on.
Thank you so much.
Not really. I mean, some people can see it that way. It's